Project Catalyst presents Bench to Bedside Chats, direct from Building 22, White Oak Campus, FDA. Brought to you by the Oncology Center of Excellence, under the direction of Dr. Richard Pazder. Beyond these doors, the Oncology Center of Excellence, in collaboration with the Centers for Drug Evaluation, Biologics Evaluation, and Devices and Radiological Health, including scientists, regulatory reviewers, and leaders, have developed multiple programs focused on improving the treatment and cure of cancer. Project Catalyst is one of those efforts intended to help the academic scientist, university life science accelerator, and oncology startup company navigate the regulatory drug development enterprise and translate your insights into drugs to treat and cure cancer.
The Oncology Center of Excellence and Project Catalyst are really excited to have you guys here today and to do this Bench to Bedside chat. And this chat is going to be a little bit different than our usual OCE Bench to Bedside chat, but mostly for our panelist members today and for our audience. I just want to kind of set the stage as to what these Bench to Bedside chats are about. These discussions are intended to be primarily for academicians, life science accelerators, and small oncology startup companies with limited resources, sometimes to include even a lack of a regulatory consultant. They are informal, kind of non-scripted conversations centered around drug development issues that are usually oncology-centric, where we start with a guidance document, kind of explain the concepts of that guidance document, and then provide some granularity and examples around oncology. We're going to broaden our approach in this particular Bench to Bedside chat. Now, it's really important to get across to everyone that these are not intended to develop new regulations or guidance or policy, and they're definitely not to be used as for some kind of quote where that's the lowest threshold, that's the lowest bar that we need to meet for various regulatory requirements. So these are just to help you guys gain the audience to gain insight and understanding regarding FDA's thoughts and perspectives on early drug development issues. And today, I'm pretty excited because the issue that we're going to talk about is near and dear to my heart, and it crosses centers and offices and divisions, and truly requires a kind of village approach with collaborations across the agency. And that's this concept of economically infeasible indications, kind of capitalistic, unfriendly conditions, or other people call them market failures. And they're diseases, but in a few, but in so many. Each of the panelists today is integrally involved in facilitating approval of safe and effective drugs for indications where there are just too few patients to drive too little monetary incentive to drive innovation and development of drugs in these patient populations. And there are thousands. I did a seminar that I was invited by Dr. Retsky to. They did a seminar, and I had to do some education for myself. There are thousands of these kind of rare diseases, and oncology has hundreds of rare tumor indications, and those tumor indications just continually expand based on kind of the ongoing, new molecular subsets from kind of the ongoing omics revolution that's occurring. I frequently joke with one of our panelist members today regarding their status as a superhero, because I'm just their incredibly remarkable background. But I really think today that we kind of have the whole Marvel's Avenger team here. We have Doctors Donahue, Retsky, Schneider, Stoddard, Winecki, and Zane. And Project Catalyst is not only grateful for their participation, but I'm kind of personally really, really appreciative of, I have respect and admiration for these folks. And one of the panelist members here, I actually tried to get a job in their particular office, multiple different times over many, many years. So there are people that I truly, truly, truly respect, and I think they do a fantastic job. And I also want to point out that these are highly educated scientists and physicians, and they could be monetarily, substantively rewarded in private industry to a much greater extent than they are at FDA, but they choose to be public civil servants. And a lot of that is because I think they probably have a passion for trying to help you facilitate drugs for these economically infeasible indications. And without them pursuing these things, would be many patients who would never receive the potential, life-altering, advantages of some of these therapies. So let's start, and I'd like to have everyone kind of introduce themselves, a little bit about where you are, where you're from, and then, just kind of touch on the various programs and initiatives that your various offices and divisions do for these indications. And then we'll have I hope, a lively conversation around like three major topics. I think those are going to be education, then, money, endpoints, and then maybe in the end, we'll throw in a bonus end game discussion point. But let's start with, I think when we do this alphabetically, we start with Martha Donahue.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jeff, for agreeing to have me be part of this conversation. I am a pediatric oncologist by training, and I serve as the Associate Director for Pediatric Oncology and Rare Cancers in the Oncology Center of Excellence. What that basically means is I help oversee the policy to help incentivize and direct pediatric cancer drug development and work with the FDA review divisions who are working on specific drug development programs in the pediatric and rare cancer space.
Awesome, thanks. Dr. Retzky?
Hi, everybody. My name is Sandy Retzky. I am a pharmacist, physician, and a lawyer, and I am the director of the Office of Orphan Products Development. Our office is in the Office of the Commissioner, and all we do is work on rare diseases. We have two major programs. One are designation programs that provide incentives, financial incentives, and other types of incentives for development of medical products for rare diseases. And we also have grants programs, and I'll talk about those more a little later.
Dr. Schneider.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie Schneider. I am a molecular biologist by training. I am the Associate Director for Research Strategy and Partnerships in the Oncology Center of Excellence. And in that role, I oversee OCE's regulatory science research efforts, including some for rare cancers. I've been at the FDA for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was at the National Cancer Institute for about 12 years. I'm very excited to participate in the discussion today.
Dr. Stoddard.
Thank you, Jeff. Let me first say what a privilege it is to be part of this panel and to be afforded a platform to talk about our CEDAR Small Business and Industry Assistance Program, better known as SBIA. I am a pharmacist by training, and I am the program director for the SBIA program, which is housed within CEDAR's Division of Drug Information. And DDI, Division of Drug Information, interfaces with the public on behalf of CEDAR and is thus, often the first stop for small pharmaceutical business trying to contact the agency. And hopefully I'll be able to expand upon that in a little bit. Thank you.
And I'm going to interject here because I had to twist Brenda's arm to be part of this panel because she wasn't sure that she fit into this particular discussion. And we just finished doing a webinar that SBIA produced with regards to small
NIH,
companies. Yeah, exactly. And NIH and the CARES program. But education is, for this particular audience that we're trying to reach out to, education is just, is paramount for folks to be able to go forward and do, intelligent, informed, successful drug development. And that's why I was like, Brenda, you have no choice but to be here.
Thank you, Jeff.
Jeff,
Dr.
I couldn't agree with you more about SBIA. They are a great team, and they produce incredible programs for the public, especially for small businesses. And it always amazes me because I'm on their listserv. It always amazes me that how active they are and what valuable information they give the public about drug development.
Thank you for that endorsement, Dr. Retzky. I'm getting goosebumps.
Dr. Winecki.
Scott Winecki. I'm a pediatrician by training. I spent 12 years in pediatric practice and then joined the FDA 13 years ago. Currently work on the rare diseases team in the Office of New Drugs, and we administer the Accelerating Rare Disease Cures program, where really what we're trying to do is increase the development of effective and safe treatment options for people with rare diseases that have unmet medical needs. And we do that through addressing policy issues, as well as education and outreach.
And Dr. Zane.
Thanks, Jeff, and to the Oncology Center of Excellence for the invitation. Like Sandy and Brenda, I am a pharmacist by training and for a long time by trade. I'm currently the director of the Office of Clinical Pharmacology, which sits in CDER's Office of Translational Sciences. Before that, I was the associate director for genomics. I've been involved in a variety of leadership and governance roles in many programs over the years that could be of relevance to the rare disease space. These include the Voluntary Exploratory Data Submissions Program, Drug Development Tool Qualification, Model-Informed Drug Development, and as Scott just mentioned, most recently, the Advancing Rare Disease Cures, or ARC program. And looking forward to talking about these and other issues throughout the time we have together.
Some great things. So I have a little outline here that to help me follow stuff. And one of the things I wanted to do, because I've already done it and I'm going to continue to do it. But make some definitions and some qualifications here. Sandra's in charge of the Office of Orphan Drugs, and there are statutory definitions and mandates about what we do and how we do it and what things are defined. And one of them is rare diseases, and I'm sure Dr. Reski-Sender will discuss this. But I want to make the point that I will probably use the word ultra rare, and because and for Julie's sake, in oncology, we have a program which was for ultra rare oncology indications, and we kind of internally made this definition of less than 300 patients per year for oncology, because we thought that is an economically infeasible kind of patient population for companies to go after. But the definition for rare, as Sandra will probably point out, is an incidence or a prevalence like 250,000 a year, and that's it. Most of oncology, all breadbasket oncology, all falls under that, and 90% of that, there is plenty of economic incentive to drive development in those those oncology indications. It's what we call that ultra rare, less than 300, where we're trying to provide some additional benefit for that. But I just want to, in case And I think Sandra's point is that it's the economic we're really talking about economically infeasible conditions, and the definition and the denominator for that, what defines an economically infeasible condition, will be different based on what the disease is and what the societal kind of economic healthcare burden impact of that particular disease has, and what the drug does. So I don't want to confuse anybody out there when we might be using the wrong term. So I'll try to stay away from ultra rare and use the term economically infeasible. The first topic here, and I'm sure we could spend an hour on this, but once again, when we interact with large pharma, one thing that's really clear to most of us, I think, is large pharma has been around the block hundreds of times, and they have a ton of experience. and so when they come to the table, that they know what they're doing. But for this particular audience that we're reaching out to, I think that many times the experience can be lacking, right? And the next best thing to experience, is being able to inform yourself and education and interactions with the FDA. And we have so many different ways, now to interact with the FDA. The Interact program, which is a pre-IND, a pre-IND, but there are also, the oncology program has a number of kind of more informal ways to interact with the FDA. But what was really interesting for me in trying to put this together is that, I always think, oncology is always doing something, different and out of the box. But you guys are clearly doing stuff that is just as out of the box as the stuff that we're doing that I didn't actually know about. So I would love to hear, the CDER's Advancing Rare Disease Cures ARC program. And one of the things I read in the pink sheet, and I think Assam sent it to me, was, and I'm always terrified about having something show up in the pink sheet, right? That I said, a quote from me, and it happened a lot, but it's happened a couple times. But one of the things that was in the pink sheet was, and I think this is with regards to the translational science consult like team that OTS has, but at the same time, the CEDAR translational science team seems to be another tiny step into the drug development business for FDA. And this is, obviously we all know that the pink sheet got that wrong. I think we really have to spell this out for everyone, is, that we don't develop drugs, and that we don't compete with industry, and that we provide a fair and level playing field for the development of safe and effective drugs. But once again, that quote was for the Advancing Rare Disease Cures program. And I would love to hear, what Scott and Assam think about what it does, and how would a sponsor or an academician or an accelerator, how would they take full advantage of those programs?
Yeah, I can start by talking about ARC first. I think one of the things that sponsors can take advantage of is our educational opportunities. So we've tried to make our website a one-stop shop, because I think if you have experience with the FDA website, you know that it's not always the easiest to negotiate. So we've listed guidance documents there, for instance, by topic, so you don't have to know the name of the guidance to search for it. So if you're interested in guidances about rare disease or guidances about clinical trial design, you can find them there. We also, every time we have a workshop or a meeting, we record that meeting and keep the slides, and we have those available on our website. So if you want to look at our meeting on clinical trial design or on registries, natural history studies, they're there. So I think the educational component is one important thing, particularly for those rare disease drug developers that don't have a lot of experience that you were just talking about, Jeff.
Jeff, can I react? I want to react to that quote first.
Please do.
Well, I'm not that mad at it. I mean, I think so. Going back, you're right. I mean, we obviously don't develop drugs, but I think there's sort of a philosophical attitude, and going back to when I joined FDA many years ago, I noticed that FDAers fell into two camps when it came to, engaging with sponsors. And that is, well, we're regulators, we're not drug developers. And what that translated to me was, you go out and do your drug development, and then you come back and we'll tell you if you did it right. And that's not exactly the most helpful posture, I think, right? And then the other camp is, well, we're going to sort of be proactive about where we see the potential pitfalls or the issues, and really sort of take on that role of providing, context-specific advice that's synthesized over our multidisciplinary collective experience, but it does require taking some risks, right? And sort of being specific. And so I think what we're seeing in rare disease,
prescriptive.
Well, I don't have a problem with that either. I mean, right now, of course, there's this, Janet Woodcock and I wrote about this years ago, this regulatory paradox where, developers want us to be very specific, but provide enough latitude, right? So that we're not being prescriptive, but then you get that challenge, right? Of consistency in decision-making and, clarity in the advice. All of this to say, I think what we're trying to do in rare disease is to take that more sort of open, proactive posture and be able to be in thought partnership as these challenges, as we encounter these challenges, both on the policy level and at the individual development program level. One of the things that I think is most exciting to me within ARC is this translational science team program or consult, which, if I'm not mistaken, it might have Dr. Cavazzoni may have been quoted in that. Was it in that article where she was talking about the translational science
Potentially,
team? Yeah, maybe it was another one. But this is an example of where I think, as most folks in the audience know, the FDA assessment team or review team is comprised of multidisciplinary sciences, clinicians, clinical pharmacologists, statisticians, chemists, and so on. And they're really tasked with providing this advice. And these issues are so challenging in rare disease, especially around issues of, around biomarkers for confirmatory evidence or evidence of effectiveness, the entire the confirmatory evidence package, these evidentiary questions, and by extension, these trial, these development design questions. They're so complicated that multiple sets of eyes, in addition, that supplement the review teams, we think are going to be helpful. And so through this translational science team, we're basically providing some additional support to the review teams in the form of, deep subject matter expertise and senior leadership from the multiple disciplines in order to bolster, the review team's engagements with applicants, as well as try to think through some of these complex issues, which don't have very straightforward answers, depending on the
we'd had this discussion offline, and I one of the first questions after I heard all this stuff is like, in Leap for Oncology, and I'm sure it's true for many other divisions. I mean, it's not like we have all the resource. I mean, there's a lot of work. I mean, reviewers are tasked and busy, and the idea that they're going to go through and do deep dives into the science and read actually primary literature is just not likely to be able to happen very often, right? And so the fact that you guys provide all of that, that work and that advice is, I think, phenomenal.
Yeah, and what tends to happen when you so I think the number is somewhere around 7,000 or 10,000 rare diseases, right? And so when those come through the door, remember, we're not the experts, and we can't be experts in 10,000 rare diseases, right? So in many ways, we're starting from scratch. And what's the tendency, or what can be the tendency, to your point, when you don't have that, protected time, or you don't have sufficient bandwidth, you default to the most conservative position, right? You just don't have time to get up to speed on those issues and provide, alternative views aside from the sort of default conservative position. And what this kind of engagement allows is more confidence, let's say, in being specific, if we want to go back to your point, not being prescriptive, but being specific about what we see as the trade-offs of one approach over another. So to me, it's a very exciting
along those lines, and I don't want to take up a lot of time,
Sure.
But I have noticed the exact same thing. To get FDA folks, and I'm not sure if when you're dealing with billion-dollar indications and a bunch of lawyers on the other side of the table, and you start to parse your words, but much of what we're trying to do, particularly with Project Catalyst, is to have more of a scientific discussion, which I think you're doing with these CIPM meetings that you have. It's like, talk about the issues, talk about the science, and but to get FDA folks to step out of their shoes a little bit and to be a little more, just less FDA-like is not an easy thing to do sometimes, right? I mean, it's really, so we have these accelerator innovator discussion meetings where we'll interact with an accelerator group, and they're slowly starting to realize that they can kind of say things maybe that have more latitude, and they don't have to be fixated on in a very narrow spectrum about what they're allowed to talk. So I completely understand that, and I think these kind of, hopefully our bench to bedside chats are part of that, education and that kind of arena where it's a little more open and a little less formal. So the ARC program sounds really, really interesting, and I'm impressed. But tell me about the START pilot program that you guys have.
Yeah, so START is a pilot. It stands for Support for Clinical Trials Advancing Rare Disease Therapeutics. And it's a joint CBER and CDER program. So we're working across centers on this one. And the idea is to increase communication with sponsors outside or different from the formal meeting process. So we're increasing communication with more frequent communication with sponsors. And the idea is to be milestone driven and move a program to its next big milestone, say, getting them ready to run their pivotal clinical trial. So again, it's more of that direct interaction between sponsor companies and FDA on how to move a program forward.
So, Martha, would that be kind of similar to the breakthrough therapy designation program? I mean, are those kind of similar approaches where there's more interactions with the sponsor, or?
I kind of view them differently, and though Scott can definitely interject. My understanding is that with the START program, it's providing sort of an avenue for communication, and part of the beauty of it is the cross-center collaborative process. And you're right, Jeff, that breakthrough therapy designation does, allow more flexibility and dedication of resources on the FDA side to providing sponsors advice and sort of a more, ongoing or frequent basis than sometimes we do for other products. So I think the intent is the same, to facilitate drug development for promising drugs and biologics for patients who have a high unmet need. But it's a different way of coming at it. In my experience, I think part of the beauty of this kind of reorientation or different philosophy that I think Issam was discussing regarding kind of the FDA engagement with sponsors about drug development programs is that, over the course of the past 15 or so years that I've been working at the agency, I think, irrespective of breakthrough therapy designation or no, when we see a development program for a disease area that has a high unmet medical need, I, think that in general, the review divisions and sort of the other offices supporting them are taking a more proactive approach and, allowing more meetings and having kind of rolling up our sleeves and having discussions during meetings to try to problem solve and think about trade-offs in drug development that have to occur in the rare space, irrespective of breakthrough therapy or no.
Yeah. Scott, how do you guys do that? How do you I mean, the truth be told, there are limited resources, right? And I can see things that I think are really exciting and really likely to have maybe go somewhere, and other things that, that are less exciting based on the science and based on preclinical data. How do you guys divvy out those resources?
I think that's a challenge because there's only so many hours in a day, and the answer is you just try to be efficient and squeeze things together. But specifically regarding START, it's a pilot, so like all pilots, right? We do this one time, kind of look at it, take stock of what resources does it need, what did it require, what went well, what didn't go so well, and how can we change it if we're going to make this into a longer term program.
And then I assume that the pilot means that many times we don't necessarily have to say why we picked a particular company and or product and or development program, because we're just trying to learn so that we can generate a more substantive program down the line. But then at some point, people are going to want to know, what are your criteria? How were these decisions made? I'm assuming something along those lines.
Right, and I think they were pretty broad for the pilot, but agreed. If the program continued, there probably would be more specific criteria. But for this one, there were particular criteria about different between CBER and CDER of what particular therapeutic areas we were looking at. But really the idea, again, is to just move this program forward and help them with things like maybe clinical trial study design or choice of their control group or fine tuning their subpopulation for their trial.
Did they get like a specific person that they got to call up and talk to whenever they wanted to? How were those interactions?
I think it's never that easy, right? Because it's not, you can't just pick up the phone and call somebody at FDA and ask a question.
You can never. People always are telling me I can never talk to anybody unless you have a regulatory project manager, and then
Well, and certainly the RPMs play a key role there, for sure. But I think if you want to give out good advice, right, it's not a question of just calling up and asking a question. It's getting that question to the right person, formulating an answer, right, refining it, and then giving back to the sponsor. So it's not as simple as picking up the phone, but the idea is that it's different than, okay, well, I'm going to schedule a type B meeting for this particular reason, kind of thing.
The oncology OCE developed as oncology regulatory expertise and early guidance program, where they can do the same, where they don't have a pre-IND or 90, but they have a product question or a particular development question. They can ask it, and then we will have them interact with the primary reviewers, but we will facilitate the subject matter experts to weigh in on the particular question, and it will be product type advice, not product specific advice. But it sounds like a kind of a similar approach.
I agree.
So I know, someone told me that there are a number of other underneath ARC, a number of other efforts, and I was just so I'm gonna before you guys go on to those other efforts, I want to ask Brenda. Do you tell people about all these various programs and efforts and provide them links? Or I mean, I know Scott said they try to make a one-stop shopping center, and I know the OCE is trying to do that as well, because everybody is right when you try to find it on your own through the FDA. Many times these things aren't. It's not intuitive as to where you would go and what documents or what guidance documents you would look at. So do you help guide these people, Brenda?
Yes, we do. And if you give us an opportunity, we will do that. We do it on a one-to-one basis. Our staff, we have about 40 healthcare professionals. Most of us are pharmacists. Most of us answer direct inquiries via dedicated telephone numbers and an email address. So you can call us, you can email us, and we will provide you with the links to the various programs. And we'll also help you to navigate to the relevant websites. As Scott mentioned, the FDA website can be pretty intimidating. So we will walk you through the website. We will help you navigate to where you need to be. And if, definitely putting in guidances, we'll help you search your guidances and everything. And troubleshoot if we have, if a database is a query or something like that, we will actually go through the database with you and make sure you gain some kind of competence with doing searches on your own. And for this particular conversation, I think Scott was referring to the Rare Disease Innovation Hub, and we can walk you through that as well. And that hub serves as a single point of connection and engagement with the entire rare disease community, which includes the patient and caregiver groups, the trade organizations, the scientific and academic organizations, and for matters that intersect CEDAR and CBER. So yeah, we'd be more than happy to do that. For the more granular and specific questions, again, like Scott intimated, we will consult with the appropriate office and get you the response that you need and reply to you. And I would like to emphasize that if you send us an inquiry, and typically these inquiries, the more complex ones come in by email, if you make your inquiry as comprehensive as possible, that will facilitate and make that consultation process even quicker and more reliable. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks. Scott and Assam, can you guys highlight those other ARC initiatives that I'm much less familiar with?
Well, one of them I would touch on from the rare diseases team, not necessarily under ARC, but a PDUFA program, is the Rare Disease Endpoint Advancement Program. So similar to START, that's a joint CBER and CDER program where you can apply, and we accept applications quarterly. And then if selected for the program, and this runs through fiscal year 27, if selected through the program, you get a meeting with the center, and then up to 3 additional meetings to develop your novel endpoint. So if you have a rare disease application that has a novel endpoint, this is a way to take advantage of that, because certainly endpoint development is one key challenge in rare disease drug development.
I will mention one program, but before I do, Scott, do you want to say anything about, I know Jeff mentioned education at the top of the hour. Do you want to say anything about Leader 3D, which is such an impressive
absolutely.
program?
Yeah. Thanks, Assam. So Leader 3D is another one of the ARC programs where we went out and talked to rare disease drug developers and asked them for what topics did they need more education on, would they like to see more resources. One of the things that came out of that was our list of guidances, because they often asked for guidance on topics we already had guidance on. So we took that to mean they couldn't find it. Yeah. But they also asked for things like non-clinical topics, natural history diseases, and clinical trial design. So we published a report in February on that research of looking at rare disease drug developers and what they needed. And we're now working on developing educational materials to address the areas that came out in that report.
And yeah, thanks, Scott. I'll just mention one more, Jeff. It's not under ARC per se, but I think it's very synergistic. You had mentioned, and what made me think about it is like we were talking about points of entry to FDA, these critical path innovation meetings, or CPIMs. Folks may not be aware of these. The program's been around for a little over 10 years. And basically what it is a very informal It's not intended to be, high intensity, high preparation, non-regulatory meeting where people could come in and basically talk to FDAers from across disciplines on specific topics, let's say broad topics in drug development. It could be related to their space. It could be rare disease related, but it's not tied to a specific product, a specific IND. And so the nice thing about this is two-way exchange. People can express, personal opinions. They can, it helps to understand what the knowledge gaps are. It's meant to be an engagement opportunity irrespective of sector. I mean, we've had over 100 of these so far. About 40% of them are from, industry, drug developers, but 15 to 20% each are from universities, patient advocacy groups, as well as consortia. So it's a very, broad stakeholder group that comes in and talks about those. And what's really nice about those is, I think, two things. One, they can be, not only do they facilitate discussion, but they can facilitate triaging. If you're not ready to have a regulatory conversation, but then we start to veer into that territory, we can point you to the right avenue, right, to engage, let's say, with the review division or with a policy group or with a stakeholder group. So that's one coordinating function, I would say. The other is that many of these topics that we talk about in these critical path innovation meetings are very much related to the kinds of things that are of relevance to the challenges in rare disease development. They could be around the development of what we call drug development tools. So biomarkers, patient-reported outcomes, clinician-reported outcomes, computational, in silico trial designs, natural history studies, and emerging tech. There's a lot of interest in digital health and how that might facilitate, or digital biomarkers, how that might facilitate uncovering novel endpoints, novel biomarkers in diseases that are with marked heterogeneity, and then just innovations in clinical trial design approaches. So those are all, it is a closed door meeting in the sense of the proceedings are not public, but all the topics are public. So that's all listed on our website. And again, run out of the Office of Translational Sciences. So if people are looking for how to enter into the stream, that might be a good place to have a first look.
No, we had talked about this offline as well, and I'm embarrassed to admit this now, but we had talked about it, how to have these more informal interactions and not to make us be a black box, and we're not scary, and we actually really want to help, and we can say, we don't have to stop a meeting and parse out a sentence and then, does everyone agree on that particular sentence? But that there's discussion. There's a lot of meetings on my calendar, and after we had this discussion, I looked at what it was CPIM. I had just gone to a meeting, and they were discussing condensate biology, and I was a little confused on how they were drug specifics to these condensates. And one of the CPIM meetings was on condensate biology, and and I just didn't, I had never actually attended those meetings, so I am going to start to attend those just for interest's sake. But I think that's a great approach. But you guys in OCE are trying to make that we're not supposed to be a scary black box. So the more you interact with us, the more likely we are to help you early and to avoid challenges in the whole drug development process.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Brenda.
If I wanted to take this opportunity to add to something about the synergy of the programs and just give a little context of how SBIA is also involved in these programs. So CEDAR Social Media operates within our Division of Drug Information. And the social media team last year formed a small working group dedicated to rare diseases. And they set a goal. We set a goal to make a more targeted messaging strategy with the resources that FDA has available to, as mentioned before, patients, caregivers, academia, industry, etc. And the team started meeting with the ARC and the CEDAR Rare Diseases teams in an effort to better understand the goals and the resources we had available to share. And then we began amplifying the guidance documents targeted around the rare disease drug development, like the Leader 3D program mentioned here, there are the DIA program, and we have posted messaging on multiple social media platforms, including LinkedIn, Target audience is healthcare professionals, industry sponsors. And the last year alone, we posted over 100 posts, including polls, interactive PDF guidances, and a lot more. So we are doing our best to keep involved and, you know, help promoting everything that everyone is working so hard to get accomplished.
Yeah, no, it's really, you can easily get in your kind of silo, and I think your job is to make sure you know what is in everybody else's silo, so you can connect people to all of those different programs and stuff. And I think that's fantastic. But I know we're going to get to endpoints eventually, and we're going to come back to kind of the things that we were just discussing. But I just want to make sure that Martha had the chance here. Do we have any programs in the? I mean, I realize, you know, as you said, if we see something that looks like it has, you know, paradigm changing potential, we're going to step in and make an effort and help direct and lead people, even if they haven't managed to get breakthrough therapy designation status. But do we have any, you know, this kind of these pilot programs for like START, where, you know, I mean, I like to think of it as concierge, and I know maybe that's not the right word to use, but more of a, you know, for economically infeasible indications where there's not a lot of resources, there's, you know, that we and they don't have regulatory consultants, that we, you know, we provide them a little more hand-holding. Do we have anything along those lines or approaches?
Thanks for the question, Jeff. But before I get to your question, I was just reflecting upon hearing this conversation that, Brenda, I'm not directing enough people to you in your group. So I now stand corrected, and because a lot of what I tend to do, or a decent chunk of what I do, is help people navigate through the different resources at FDA. When people reach out to me, you know, they're developing in the rare cancer space, they find my email somehow, or they go onto the OCE Rare Cancers webpage and utilize the email address that's there. And I think a lot of it is people just don't know what they don't know. They don't know the resources all there. It's hard even for people who work at the FDA to know what these resources are. So having, you know, a service such as that you and your group provides is just phenomenal. Absolutely. I'm very excited to hear this.
Definitely direct those inquiries to us. Yeah, we will.
So now you're going to be sorry that we've had this conversation, maybe. But at any rate,
so I think you're right,
I've learned
Martha,
a lot already.
And
but then I'll get to your question eventually, Jeff. Sorry, go ahead, Sandy.
It would be a really good idea, since we can edit this, if every time Brenda speaks, we have the listserv address so that people can. That listserv is terrific, and I highly recommend it. And you're absolutely right. What the service that Brenda's group gives is just unbelievable.
Yeah,
and it's
and we have people
underutilized.
dedicated. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
This will be edited out, but Brenda just organized a webinar with like 6,000 people. Now, I don't think there were ever 6,000 people there, but and it wasn't where it can be edited out. So it was like live, and being quoted in the pink sheet is one thing, and saying the wrong thing with 6,000 people listening to you is another one.
Jeff, the one I attended that Brenda put on, it was an excellent production. But it had 13,000 participants from all around the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's another point I think that's so important is, yes, FDA is a United States regulatory body, but we work with colleagues across the globe, and particularly with rare diseases and those that are really small and economically infeasible, international trials are
almost mandatory.
Yeah.
So along those lines, I want to move to money, and
we want it.
Well, everybody wants the money, right? And except for my superhero Avengers here, who honestly want to help. But you know, I was at the annual meeting for technology transfer, and I really felt like a fish out of water there. But I was with some colleagues from the National Science Foundation and from other agencies in the HHS, and we were explaining our programs, and mostly what Project Catalyst does, is, and for what most of us here today do, is provide advice and direction and guidance, and we don't provide a lot of money. but these other programs had a lot of substantive amount of funds that they were distributing, and poor Project Catalyst was there trying to help them realize that, you can have all the money in the world, but if you make really poor drug development decisions, you can have some unnecessary challenges and not necessarily be successful. But I know that there are programs at the FDA and Sandra, the Orphan Drugs Office, facilitates clinical trial development with orphan indications. And I would love to hear about that. And also Julie from the OCE is very involved in supporting regulatory research and for our rare cancers, ultra rare cancers, and pediatric tumors. So I'm gonna start with I don't want to throw any curveballs to anybody, but I always wonder, and I participated on some of your review sessions, for these orphan drugs and rare indications for oncology, that you guys support. But how do you some of them were commercial, some of them were academic. I just wonder how that all works. Dr.
So
Retzky,
sorry, Jeff, are you
Sandra.
okay?
So I guess the question is, how do you, there are so many questions here, but for rare diseases where you might have preclinical data that, wow, you have a mouse model, it's translated into the clinic before you have a drug therapy, actually you have a drug or a biological therapy that clearly works on the model that you think will translate into the clinic. Yet the global impact, like things like laminin A progeria or something else, where on a global scale it might not have great societal health impacts, but for that patient population it might be truly paradigm changing for them. How do you guys decide what to choose, what to fund, commercial, non-commercial? There's a lot of intricacies and nuances involved.
So let me take a step back. You asked the question about where's the money? How do we get the money? So our office has a grant program, and I'll talk about that in just a second, but I want to take a moment to define what a rare disease is. So in the United States, a rare disease is considered one where there's less than 200,000 people in the United States that have that disease, or where the cost of developing the drug and selling it in the United States is economically infeasible. The costs are not expected to be recovered. In either case, those are defined as rare diseases. And if a disease is rare, then it's available for our designation programs, which provide incentives, and our grants programs. So let me talk about the money first, our grants programs. Our grants programs have been around for the past 42 years, so they're very old. We don't have lots of money. We get about $25 million a year appropriated from Congress for these grant programs, and there's two parts to them. So one is for the development of drugs, and that's called our clinical trials grants, and the other is for natural history studies. So for clinical trial grants, it just people can apply. We put out it's called an RFA, which stands for Request for Applications. And we put out 1 to 2 a year. If you want to see when the next RFA is coming out or what we have funded, you can go to our website, just go Rare Diseases Grants, FDA.gov, and it'll pop up. So what we tend to do is fund people who are early in their development. Once in a while, we will fund somebody who is in late stage development, phase 3. But most of the time, it might be the first trial ever for this drug, or it might be an early trial for proof of concept, but it's almost all of our funds go to very early stage development products. And these our grants have been really quite successful. When I first came, I was surprised at how many products have been pulled across the finish line with these grants. And typically our grants are between $400,000 and $600,000 a year. Sometimes it's more, sometimes as much as $1 million a year. And we fund for 4 years at a time. So that might not seem like a lot in the world of drug development, much less rare disease drug development. But where I think it's so helpful, in fact, critical, is that when we give somebody a grant, it gets the validation of FDA. That's important. That tends to attract more money. So typically, our grantees get co-funding, whether it be friends and family, angels, venture capital, uh, somewhere else, they will find the money. But once they get that grant from us, it really helps them get more money. Then on top of it, they will also get meetings with the review division. There'll be usually an opening meeting once they get the grant. You know, during the grant process itself, we really can't change the grant application or make suggestions. But once we award somebody a grant, then we can start making suggestions. And sometimes we even give them more funding if they make some changes to their development program. So I think the advice we give is very valuable. And then we have Unite programs at least once a year where all of our grantees get together to learn from each other about drug development, what they're doing. Those are very nice meetings. So it's not just money, it comes with advice too. So as I mentioned, we have clinical trial grants. We also have natural history grants. Those are every other year, and we fund usually 1 to 2 natural history studies. And if you don't know, a natural history study is an observational study. There's no intervention, there's no drug. Where the endpoints are trying to understand the pathophysiology, the natural course of the disease. So many of these rare diseases, the natural course of the disease is not well understood. Well, it's pretty hard to develop a drug if you don't understand the natural course of the disease, because you've always got to take a drug, an investigational drug, and compare it to something to see if it works. And that's why it's so helpful to have natural history studies. That's the whole
Can I interrupt
idea.
there and ask a question?
Sure.
So we're
sure.
going to talk about it if we have the time within our 2 hours. but you know, the natural history protocol is also like an endpoint kind of development process as well, right? Because that if you're
Absolutely.
defining disease,
Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
so is that part of the thought process? Is that this is also endpoint development?
Yep. A natural history study is a great time to do endpoint development, Jeff, like biomarker development. Right now, one of the things my office is doing is looking at a tool for ALS, and it's an observational study. There's no drug involved. So we want to be able to understand how the tool works for function in people with ALS. And you want to do that regardless of if somebody's on a drug or not. That's the beauty of an observational study. There's no drug effect.
You know, what are the rules or the concerns around, you know, I mean, sometimes, as you point out, is non-dilutive funding to get venture capital funding, which is fantastic, right? I mean, if you can de-risk a program to the point where someone else is willing to come in and take it to the finish line, that we've done our job. Fortunately, I think many times there is no finish line, and you can't de-risk a program enough. But what are the concerns around de-risking? How do you what are the criteria, or who does anyone ever have issues that that a commercial entity is getting funded by the FDA to go out and eventually make more money? I mean,
It's a very good question. And basically you're saying, isn't there a conflict with giving somebody who's already a commercial entity money? When it comes to rare diseases, and this is the spirit of the Orphan Drug Act, we're agnostic to who's coming to the table. What we want is to accelerate product development for rare diseases, and it can't go fast enough. And so it doesn't really matter to us whether it's a private entity, a public entity. In fact, we even fund foreign entities. The important thing is it for a rare disease? That's what's important. And I think it is a global effort to try to develop products for these diseases and for all the difficulties that we've already mentioned, particularly the ones that have very, very small populations. So
I think that's I'm so happy to hear that, and I'm sure that Dr. Schneider, Julie, is happy to hear that as well, because it certainly frames some of the stuff that I think the Oncology Center of Excellence is trying to do along those same kind of lines, with regards to drug discovery versus just regulatory kind of stuff that FDA would do. The
wait,
the
before I let you go on, Jeff, I want to mention our newest grant program, though. It's called the FDA Rare Neurodegenerative Disease Grant Program. And I know it's not necessarily oncology, but it's a brand new grant program that Congress started in 2021. And it's specific to rare neurodegenerative diseases, whether those rare neurodegenerative diseases occur in children or in adults. So it began with a law called the Act for ALS, but there's a section of the law that is specific to an FDA grant program, and it just needs to be a rare neurodegenerative disease, not necessarily ALS. And it can be in children or adults.
for the funding decisions, does the I'd say bang for the buck, but there's probably a more eloquent way. Like, does the impact on the societal health burden does that play a role at all, or is it you think there's really good science and the clinical trial is really well developed to show a good endpoint that you would fund that?
So first of all, let me make a point that it is not FDA making the decisions about the funding. We have the money, we do the administrative work, but it is an external panel of experts that score the applications in terms of how, the merit and how valuable they will be to society and for this rare disease. So that's important. And included in that external panel are patients and sometimes patient advocates. And so I think that's very important to understand that FDA does not make the decisions. We're more administrative, helpful advice, like so many of the other programs that we've been talking about. And I
Sandy,
think I'm sorry.
oh, sorry, no, again, I was gonna say, and you consult the review divisions
That's correct.
during those reviews if needed, because, it's not that unusual, right? For some of these products, for which there are applications that, are already known, or have an IND often, in a specific division. And so I think you're also pulling in some of that division level expertise to help inform the panel who's making the decision.
That's
right?
correct. That is correct. The scoring is by an external panel, but all of our grants go through the review divisions to get their expertise and advice. They have a very important view, but they do not score the applications, Martha.
And I just wanted to mention, because I think it's really important for people to know regarding the grants program specifically, is that for those who are interested, on the webpage for the Office of Orphan Products Development, you have a webpage or two devoted to these grants programs, where you can go back and see what type of projects and clinical trials or natural history studies have been funded. And so, I remember I periodically go on that, and I know we work together as well in other ways, for our work. But when you go back and look at the clinical trials that have been funded, it's really fascinating to see. And I think, many of these projects, depending upon the year, are related to oncology, pediatric oncology, brain tumors, and, really, although it is a diverse array of rare diseases, I think, coming from the oncology perspective, I'm so grateful that there is this resource available to people who are trying to develop new products for rare cancers. And I think it's not that well known about, at least, among the people that I speak with. So I do try to bring it up as much as I can.
No, thanks for the advertisement, Martha, and the endorsement. But typically in any given year, we'll fund between 7 and 10 clinical trials. So that's in addition to the natural history studies every other year. And roughly 20 to 40% of those will be for cancer, often pediatric cancers, because there's such great unmet need. So that's something that we do frequently, and that's why we contact you to get your advice. But in going back to Jeff's question about de-risking, I think the fact of just getting an FDA grant helps de-risk a lot. And you notice that I said at the beginning that we tend to fund early stage. So that's where the risk is. as you get further and further in development, the chance of crossing the finish line for approval gets higher and higher. But at the very beginning, when you're first starting in the clinic, depending on the therapeutic area, it's in the single digits, the likelihood of being able to get product approval. But that's where we like to invest. And that's how we think of our grants. We think
So
of
I
our
like to
grants as
think
investments.
in today's world of informed drug development and biology informed drug development, that low percentage of successful drug development is that much more likely, if you have the right endpoint, in your first in human trial, you ought to be able to see a value inflection point, and that value inflection point would hopefully encourage other investors, venture capital, Series A funding, to be able to move that forward. But I think that depending on how economically infeasible that indication is, that may be more difficult than it sounds. Julie, I know that we also provide some funds for various regulatory and rare tumor population. Can you help explain some of that?
Absolutely.
Programs?
First of all, I gotta say, Sandra, it was great to hear that high-level perspective about the OOPD grants programs. Our OCE program is not 25 years old. We're just, I think we're maybe in our 5th year of funding, or, a relatively small number of projects, but some exciting ones. Rare cancers is just one of several areas that we fund in, but a very important one for sure. I think it's really interesting to hear what you were saying, because there is some difference in the focus. Like, there is some overlap. For example, the natural history studies or endpoint development would be more in our wheelhouse, but we don't tend to fund trials directly. But we've kind of, within the very rare cancer area, we've taken a slightly different approach, which I can talk about. So in general, as I said, very rare cancers is one of several priority areas that we're interested in. You could find those on our OCE Scientific Collaborative website if you're interested. But for a lot of those areas, it's more about research that can inform benefit risk assessments for oncology therapeutics in general, not, focused on a specific product. So, for example, you can see lots of examples on our website of what we're interested in, but, one example is like new types of data or technologies that are coming down the line. For example, we have a lot of research in the area of real world data where we want to learn more about, what can that data do for us, and how could it inform regulatory submissions in general, but not directed at a specific application. Now, with our very rare cancers program, we've taken a slightly different approach, I think, because of these particular challenges with just so few options available for patients with these diseases. And as, the panel has discussed, the lack of economic incentives, which is that in the rare and very rare cancers area, we are open to also supporting more translational type of work, meaning that we're interested in supporting work that can inform therapeutic development in one or more very rare cancers. So, although, it's more translational. So for example, Jeff has referred to, we have done a request for applications in very rare, or as we call them, ultra rare cancers in the past couple of years. And in addition to being interested in supporting things like natural history studies or external controls, there also has been an interest, for example, in exhaustively characterizing the plasma membrane protein expression of ultra rare, very rare cancers. So like surfaceome projects, because, these types of proteins on the surface of the cell surface could be, particularly promising candidates for further therapeutic development. So, that said, when it's more translational, I mean, it still needs to be directed towards therapeutic development, right? So we're not interested in funding research around methods development. We're not interested in funding basic science just for general, for the general developing additional knowledge. But, you know, in this area where there's such challenges, we have kind of extended, you know, our universe of types of research that we support.
And Julia, I'm so happy to hear Sandra discuss kind of their mindset about of how they approach it, because I think that makes me feel a lot more comfortable with some of our discovery efforts, and not to feel like maybe we stepped outside of the bounds of what is okay.
Well, I just love what you said, is that, you know, it's such a pressing need that it doesn't matter, you know, if it's an international group, if it's a commercial group, or, you know, it's just such a, you know, a challenge. And I think in a slightly different way, we've said, okay, you know, because it's so challenging, we're comfortable about stepping outside of sort of traditional regulatory science research, you know, just because it's such a challenging area. So
when you're doing the right thing, it's easy to defend doing the right thing. And I think you are doing the right thing, and obviously Dr. Retzky-Sander's doing the right thing.
So let me give an example of something that we invested in. So this was a drug that was shelved, meaning stopped. It was considered a failure for a common disease, and it was put on the shelf, stopped by a big pharma company. But there was a academic who was aware of this product and aware of the mechanism, and he just thought, boy, if I could get my hands on this drug and try it in a completely different disease, I could prove both the mechanism of action and treat the disease at the same time. And that is, I mean, we gave him money, and the rest of it was all friends and family. And he was able to prove his hypothesis in a single trial. This drug is now on the market for the rare disease that he studied. But and it's on the market actually for many more indications. But it was so important that he did this for a rare disease, and through working on this rare disease, proved much more than just that it works for this rare disease. It opened up a whole new area of biology and target development for other drugs. That's a huge win.
It is great. And I think that is going towards, as we're the type of more translational research that OCE wants to support, is just that, you know, to make discoveries about the biology that are directed, you know, at therapeutic development, just because there's such a great need in this area.
Well, one of the things, in part, I brought this up because I thought, wow, people need to understand that sometimes in these clinical trials, when you find out something works and you understand the mechanism, you're doing more than just product development. It's science development. You're lifting an entire field. That's an incredible win. But in this particular case, and I don't blame the company at all, they kept ties to that drug. So they offered the drug to this investigator for free because it was shelved. They had it. But they also were able to get it back once he proved the hypothesis.
Yeah, this is part of our end game discussion, and I know that you have a model, and I want to hear about it. Martha, since we're talking about clinical trials, and we're talking about funding, and we're talking about advice and money, are there any initiatives that you know of in the OCE that kind of are trying to facilitate all of these components into ultra rare, very rare, economically infeasible tumor indications?
Yes, in fact, I think you probably know about it, what I'm going to say, Jack, because you're working on it with me. So I guess about, I don't know, a year and a half ago or so, give or take, we started working on what we hope will come to fruition very soon, which is a public-private partnership between OCE, FDA, between NCI, NCATS, and others in the community who are interested in developing products for rare cancers for which drug development is not economically feasible. And so what the vision is to identify one or two or maybe three candidate rare cancers that are, sort of more falling into that ultra rare space where we're not seeing drug development, and where we don't think drug development is going to happen, for which the biology has revealed to us molecular targets or vulnerabilities that we think can be druggable, that we think a drug can be developed for today, rather than 5 years from now. And working with a stakeholder group, we're going to have a meeting, a public meeting that will involve a variety of collaborative or interested parties, advocacy, scientists, members of pharma that are interested in working with us, members of FDA, and others, to try to select the candidate kind of target cancer that we want to have as our pilot. And the vision is then, depending upon the amount of knowledge and where development is in that space, we might even go so far as starting to, either do preclinical work that's necessary to kind of form the foundation for development of an actual drug or biologic, and then move along the path to introduce that product into a clinical trial that I think will ultimately be run through NCI. And so from an FDA perspective, I think what we can bring together is help bring together the various stakeholders, provide some high-level regulatory advice with appropriate safeguards in place so that we're preserving our impartiality, et cetera, that we need to preserve as a regulator. But providing some of the support that's necessary to help de-risk that program and get it to come to fruition. I think the hope and the vision is that we will be able to announce the next stage of that sometime within the next few months, hopefully, although it's kind of making its way through the approval process. But more to come on that. And I think the other part of the vision, Jeff, I think is, it's your vision, actually. I think you had mentioned it, and it's a really important aspect of this, is that we'd like to make every step of this process public and, an open notebook kind of fashion, so that other developers who are interested in developing products in the very rare space can learn along the way as we are learning. Of course, we won't have any idea going in whether we'll achieve the success of, seeing a drug go through a clinical, phase 1, early phase 2 trial that then, has positive enough findings to warrant further development. But I think absolutely we'll learn along the way. And if we choose the right target and rare cancer, then I think that will help improve our success. And certainly we're going to bring in, as many people into this process as we can who have the knowledge and the motivation to work with us on this. And I should say that the Foundations for NIH is I think, going to be instrumental, has already been very helpful in this process. But will be a key aspect of getting this to work moving forward. But please feel free to, if I've forgotten something important,
it was well said, much better said than I could ever have done. But I'm nominating Dr. Zanay to be part of the board because I think he would fit right into that whole development program.
But there is some information on the website, on the FDA webpage. Like if you're interested in sort of the very beginnings of this, there's you can just Google public-private partnership, rare cancers, FDA and FNIH, and it should come up, and you can see a webpage that, announced the meeting. I think there's like resource materials from that meeting, which we had an initial transparency meeting back in August, if you're interested in learning more about it.
Thanks, Martha. So endpoints, clearly you have to have an endpoint to get a drug approved. We in oncology have, we kind of have it easier than you guys do, and then we have it harder than you guys to do. And I think you guys can compare and contrast this. But for tumors that are ultra rare, very rare, less than 300 patients a year, depending on the mechanism of action of the drug, we get response rates, and we can have duration of response. So we can do single arm trials with response and duration of response. And that many times, depending on the patient population indication, that can be enough for like an accelerated approval. So we can move rapidly towards approval. The thing that we don't have, that I think that because of the molecular heterogeneity of tumors, the plasticity of tumors, this mutational phenotype, genomic instability, that the idea of bringing a biomarker as confirmatory evidence towards an oncology indication is hugely problematic. But I would love to hear about single arm trials where you guys incorporate the idea, because these genetic conditions, mostly genetic, if you understand the biology and you have a biomarker that highly predicts the disease, amelioration or effects of the disease, that you could use that as confirmatory evidence. And I think that probably helps a lot in the potential regulatory flexibility that you have in approval for drugs. But maybe I'm reading too much into this, guys. Scott, this on?
I think in some ways it is as you described, but in other ways it's much tougher. A lot of these diseases are very heterogeneous in how they present, and not only in how they clinically present, but their genetics as well, right? Not everybody has the same mutation, and so that makes for different disease manifestations. So I think sometimes it can be quite complicated outside of oncology as well.
It looks greener on the other side of the fence, and it's not quite so green over there, huh? It's not quite so easy.
Well, I'd say it's not quite so easy. I mean, I think we wouldn't be talking about this if it wasn't challenging to do in the first place. Right. So I think because of the very heterogeneous nature of these diseases, it's not always easy just to find a biomarker and measure it. It never works that well. On paper, it looks like it might, but it just never works that simply.
Yeah, and I might add a few things. Jeff, you'll have to keep me honest on time because this is an area that I'm very passionate about. So, but I'll just keep it short and high level. It is very much a challenge. I think you can almost count on, or at least historically in rare disease development, that you're going to have maybe one clinical study, right? If you're lucky, one well-designed, good clinical study where you have some sort of meaningful measure of how a patient functions, or a biomarker that's vetted. That's not often the case. It's also often the case that the studies are equivocal because of the heterogeneity of the disease, right? Or because we don't have a good handle on, let's say, biomarker dynamics, or patient, we haven't enrolled sort of a predictive subset or a subset that'll, have enough events that we could measure. All kinds of reasons why the readout might be a little muddy, right? So you have to think about this question of substantial evidence way in advance. And I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do now is really have that left shift in that conversation very early in drug development. I remember when Ann Pariser was here, she did an analysis, and it was like the big determinant of clinical development time in rare diseases. I think there were two. One was if you had a pre-IND meeting, and the second was if you had an end of phase 1 meeting, not an end of phase 2 meeting. So it's like the space that we usually don't care about is precisely the space where you can have the impact. Two things you have to have. You have to have a very solid understanding of mechanism of action, and you have to have a very solid understanding of mechanism of pathogenesis. And that's not always the case, even in kind of very well, let's call them very well annotated rare diseases. And so that's where this kind of crowdsourcing of expertise comes in to think through, those issues. One thing I do want to point out in this whole question of evidence is, FDA doesn't require, we require kind of 2 adequate and well-controlled investigations, right? That's historically been interpreted to mean 2 trials that basically look the same, that are confirmed. One confirms the other, and you're just making sure that the first one is not spurious. You obviously can't do that in rare diseases. And that's not the only, clinical by adequate and well-controlled investigations. This also includes biomarker data. It also, like pharmacodynamic studies. It also could include animal studies. And so one of the things that we really are pushing hard on and trying to advance is to have in vivo PD studies, or even in vitro PD studies, or animal studies represent that confirmatory evidence. And so that has always been there, but kind of how that is to be done is something that people are, very much interested in now. It gets challenging when you try to do it after the fact, obviously, right? In a failed development program, you go back and you say, this is the best biomarker since sliced bread, or, this animal, you repurpose, outputs from animal experiments. That's usually not very helpful. But thinking about those in advance and developing more of these, those activities coupled with what Sandy was saying, developing good natural history studies and registries and advancing translational models. Those things need to all come together. And maybe even having a framework, which we don't have, on how do you vet mechanistic claims? Because at the end of the day, a company is going to come in, or an applicant's going to come in and say, we think this biomarker is the biomarker. This is the one we should use for accelerated approval or even a traditional approval. We have to, on mechanistic grounds. Well, how do you vet those claims? We have to not only vet the claims by doing exhaustive literature searches and sort of concurring with what's being proposed, but also what are the counterfactuals? What are the missing, what's the missing information? And so if as a community, and I would even argue the people that are listening to this out there, to my knowledge, there is not a rubric for thinking about mechanistic claims. How do you look at mechanistic data in support of a biomarker and kind of grade that information? How do you penalize against that information, either because it's missing or it's going in the wrong direction? So that would be I think a community proposition, and that could we do have examples of rare disease drug development paradigms that have been totally informed by the community of scientists and patients and caregivers. Duchenne is a really nice example of inputs that were brought in-house from the community, all transparently and publicly, on what endpoints were meaningful, what trial designs make a whole lot of sense, what matters to patients, what biomarkers are we can have the most confidence in, so forth.
I was just thinking, sorry, Jeff, I'm gonna just jump in real quick. Please. I'm reflecting upon, I think, the conversation that we just had a little bit earlier about the grass is always greener, and things in rare diseases are, probably often, very, very challenging, for many ways. And thinking about what you're saying, Assam, about biomarkers, and I'm thinking in the oncology space, one thing that we very much benefit from is a well-validated biomarker of response, radiologic response, which has enabled drug development and durability of response to really happen expeditiously for many types of cancer. Not all. Where we run into problems is when you can't really evaluate tumor burden, or tumor response isn't well reflected in radiologic imaging. But we have been very, very fortunate that for many cases we have had a validated biomarker, and the extent to which you can rely on tumor shrinkage as an intermediate measure of clinical benefit, an early indicator of clinical benefit versus sort of evidence of clinical benefit really can vary. But thinking about that, I think we have really benefited from that. But for the more indolent tumor types, and for minimal disease spaces or spaces where you can't really measure response well, such as an osteosarcoma, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so many of the efforts and learnings that I think many of these programs that we're talking about, for rare diseases in general, can also be applied to rare cancers.
Yeah,
Sorry,
just just a great point on that. So you're saying you have it easier, and I agree.
Well,
no.
I mean, there's a balance. There's a balance.
In some cases,
but I'm thinking about, there are certain situations where having this biomarker is a really nice tool to have, and we've been able to rely on it in many disease spaces. When you look at our approvals, we are able to evaluate effectiveness in a single arm setting, in many times, because we have that validated biomarker that we can use. It's not always possible. There are many, contexts where we can't do that, nor should we. But in the rare space where you're thinking about small sample sizes, that can be very helpful.
Yeah, and also, where the additional compounded challenge in rare disease is what and where are you going to assay? Right? If this is a multi-organ, if this disease has multi-organ manifestations, or even if it's, exactly where the lesion is, you're not going to be able to, always assay that. It's a compartment that's tough to get to, right? So that, that brings us back to this, I think inherent in the question, Jeff, is de-risking the decision, right? So if you can't get at the biomarker, and you can measure it systemically, but you can't measure it in the brain or the CSF or whatever the case may be. How do we sort of strengthen our confidence that assaying that that marker, that the decisions that we make based on that, readout are going to lead us down the right path. And so that's where this, interest in, I think, this traditional correlating a biomarker to an endpoint, a clinical endpoint, is not going to happen very often in rare diseases. But so that's why you have to have this very thoughtful approach to biological plausibility, pharmacological relevance, understanding of the disease pathways, and competing hypotheses. Right? If you block this, what are you shunting it towards? And like, have you really fully de-risked the decision? And this decision we're talking about is access, right? We're talking about approvability decisions, which is not to be taken lightly, of course.
And I think, Isam, what you said, you brought up a really important point about kind of shifting discussions, such as thinking about how will you get to substantial evidence? What's going to be the confirmatory evidence? What is that going to look like? What needs to be done? Shifting that earlier in drug development, I think, it resonated with me particularly because this is even more crucial in the rare disease space, rare cancer space, when every patient matters, right? So even the very first trial, having that ability to look ahead and think about what data do I need to capture now, so to fully leverage all the clinical experience that we can get in a certain patient population is very vital.
Assam, I can't agree that I think that understanding the biology and the pathogenesis and the molecular mechanisms of that, much more likely to intervene, be able to intervene with a drug, of some fashion, and probably more likely to be able to generate an animal model that you feel comfortable with, that would translate into the clinic, and or even support, not de-risking, but even support potential confirmatory evidence. I take your point, Scott. I was looking at my simplistic world but how many mutations are there for cystic fibrosis? I didn't think about the heterogeneity of the, I always thinking of single point mutations in a disease, and that there would less complexity. But I would bring you over to our side of the fence and to show you the complexity in tumors, and you would probably just want to, you would give up because I think our biomarker response is fantastic, but the actual trying to use molecular biomarkers for cancer is really, really difficult. Even de-risking it, to decide to take a drug into the clinic, is not always very clear as well. So I was at a recent sarcoma conference just for the last couple of days, and in some personal discussions I had, what became clear for oncology, and I am wondering for you guys as well, and I know we had kind of talked about the economic incentive to drive drug development, to some extent, and I know Sandra has ideas on models, and I would love to hear them, but in a capitalistic world, if you're not going to get return on your dollar, there's not a lot of incentive to develop a drug, particularly when you don't know that drug is going to be successful. But even in programs like, imagine if you could completely de-risk a program, right? Here's the drug, it works, right? FDA would approve it because it's safe and effective, but the patient population is so small that to manufacture that drug, to provide that drug to patients, to the onus, or there is some burdensomeness with regulatory reporting requirements. One, to make sure that the drug that's out there in the market is safe and effective, right? Part of our job, but that costs money and resources to do. And I'm just wondering what you guys think for some of your indications where, and as it was at this conference, literally people are like, well, if we can't get a company interested, we can't do it. We're not going to do it. We're not interested. They're not interested. We can't move it forward unless there's a company that's interested in it. And I just wonder what kind of your thoughts are, because there's a lot of real obvious biology that you could go after, but and with today's technology, protein degraders, antisense, very, antibody drug conjugates for cancer, bispecific engagers. I mean, there's so many, potential platforms and approaches to drug development, but people are like, we're not going to do it. What have you guys seen? What programs, what models, what initiatives, what encouragement do we give? What's out there in the world to help these patients and with these conditions?
So the model that we need to think about is not one where the ultimate goal is profit. Because you just said it, there's so few patients, it's not going to be profitable. So we have to think about other kinds of ways where organizations, parties would be interested in drug development. And what comes to mind right away are foundations, for example. And we see there's when I was a reviewer in CBER, there was a very rare disease where there might be 29 people in the United States. And this was a disease in children. And one of the parents decided, I'm starting a foundation. And he has brought a drug along for this particular disease. But it's not a for-profit kind of model. It's for different reasons. And I think we have to, as a society, we need to think about what do we really want when it comes to drug development. We don't, do we really need another diabetes or hypertension drug? We have, tens of thousands of rare diseases, 95% of which have no treatment at all. So I would look at things like foundations. For our grant programs, a foundation is acceptable. It's anybody who's interested. Another is, there's a lot of philanthropic money in the United States, but it's not concentrated in an area where drug development is really possible. And so, one that comes to mind is like the Gates Foundation, the foundation that Warren Buffett has set up. Well, it's a lot of money, a lot. If you turned it the right way towards drug development, I think anything is possible. We just have to will it.
Sandra, so I completely agree, and I think the PPP that that Martha's part of, that has that, I see value inflection points, but many times a value inflection point is not going to encourage financial incentive. A foundation, angel investors, will certainly get us to that point to see if the drug works. But I'm imagining multiple different indications with multiple rare tumors or rare diseases. Yet every one of those has to have has to be manufactured. It has to be. It's like, are you? I don't know the answer to the question, but I can imagine foundations and I can imagine philanthropic investors, being able to get you partly there, but I don't see the commercial production, and I use commercial in quotation marks, to make the drug available and then to be responsible for everything that has to be done to keep that drug on the market.
I do. I see it.
So tell me
Yes.
how that works.
So there's just about anything you want can be done through contract. And so you just need the money and the expertise to have the pieces in play, first to discover the drug and develop it. But then, as you say, you need commercial capabilities, and not just any commercial capabilities. It has to be capabilities so that you can safely put a drug into a human being. And then you need a distribution chain. That's what you're talking about. And I think if we dream it, we can do it. It just, to me, that's not the hard part. The hard part is getting what I see as large amounts of money that are available and concentrating them in drug development with people who are experts at drug development and the regulatory process. And that's what I just said. Might not seem like much. That's a hard thing to do.
It sounds like you guys are doing that with ARC, with the START program. It sounds like that's kind of, I think we kind of have a similar mission in the OCE with our efforts, but it also sounds like ARC is trying to do that as well, to bring those resources, maybe not the money part, but at least the the drug development, resources, and Assam is like, look, I'm going to tell them how to do this. I'm going to not be completely prescriptive, but I'm going to be rather specific on what your drug development program should look like. Am I reading too much into that?
Yeah, well, no, I'd be curious what Scott has to say, but I guess just adding on to what Sandy's saying, I think what you've painted, Jeff, as a hypothetical is, that'd be a nice problem to have. And I don't think that's what the issue is. I think the cost, the risk, if you will, they're amortizing all the attrition, right? Like that's really where the kind of the commercial problem comes in, is like, how do we make enough money to offset, all the failures that we've had in our pipeline? That's really the issue. Even when you look at super rare, like N of 1 antisense oligos, you have academic centers generating, these molecules for 1 or 2 patients. I mean, it can be done. There are all kinds of challenges around getting paid for that, right? Reimbursements. And so that for sure I understand. But I think if we kind of minimize the risk in that space that I was talking about, in the development space, once you get that over the finish line, I would imagine it's, they would be like Sandy's example, they were chomping at the bit to get that molecule back and commercialize it.
Well, that's
right.
because
Right.
that's because the indication was generalized to $1 billion. It's another thing when your indication is very specific for that rare patient, that patient population that's
Okay, but you just said something really important, and that is, this is the way the publishing world works as well. The big publishers don't make any money from selling poetry books. They make money selling from fiction books, right? But they still publish poetry, right? Why is it? So there is a way to offset within the ecosystem of a given company, or within a foundation, or within a commercial entity. I think it's doable, but I think it's looked at in aggregate. And so, when we think about what the opportunity space is for rare disease, where the big bang for the buck is, it's bringing the regulatory expertise, and it's de-risking, to borrow that term. I would say provide more clarity, provide more specific pathways for things like trial designs, for things like endpoint selection. Dose ranging is almost completely infeasible in some of these development programs, yet it's the thing patients care about. Like when you go to a pharmacy and pick up your prescription, so that's the access question. The next question is all the other stuff that they care about. Is this the right dose? How do I take this relative to the other things that I'm taking, right? So like those questions, we don't even have the luxury of interrogating usually in rare disease drug development. The question about de-risking the hypothesis and all this other, we can extrapolate. We can use very interesting, I think, robust quantitative and mechanistic strategies to extrapolate efficacy to untested populations. So for me, and we've done that, we did that in cystic fibrosis. You brought up the cystic fibrosis example. We did that based on in vitro molecular pharmacology assays. So I think if we can invest in those questions around, non-clinical to clinical translation, biomarker science, trial designs, you've done all the work, and then it becomes, we'll take it from here. And in fact, that's basically the model of drug development these days.
So you're allaying some of my concerns for some of these projects that we're working on. But you think if you get a drug approved that works, that someone will take that drug and make it available to for multiple different reasons, not necessarily monetary and currency, but because they get to advertise that as something doing a value to the community, that someone will take on those responsibilities to make a drug available to the community.
I think that's a piece of it, but I would also argue that there is a commercial incentive. And if you look at how some of the cystic fibrosis drugs were developed, I mean, they really were developed by foundation, right? So you had a very well networked patient community. You can sort of mobilize clinical trials very quickly. You can, sub in and out molecules. You had a good handle on the disease and at least the in vitro, like the functional elements of the disease. So you could begin to cohort patients in an efficient way. And those drugs, were competitively priced and brought a big return on investment. So I don't think they're necessarily mutually exclusive. And I'd be curious how much of a problem that is. The one that you're raising.
There's what value pricing, and then there's market, what the market will bear. And I am not sure that the market would bear what you would need to charge for 80 patients per year for an indication that we're 80 patients per year when you're not curing the disease. For oncology, a single drug doesn't cure disease. That's a generalization. An immune modulating drug might induce an immune response that cures the disease, but in general, a single drug doesn't cure a disease. It's very hard to charge what you might charge for something that, like, if you cure Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, I'm assuming that $1 million or more for that drug, even 2 or 3, probably not. The insurance companies would be willing to pay that based on what they would have had to pay for the whole course of that patient's, demise, and now they're cured, right? But for oncology, that kind of pricing strategy, the market, I don't think will bear that. So I'm not sure. I still wonder if there's going to be an economic drive, even if it's a completely de-risked program, for someone to take on, something that actually doesn't bring money back into the company. But I mean, we'll see. It's an interesting discussion for sure. I think we're at time. I want to just say thank you so much for participating in this. I think all of you guys added tremendous value, and I'm so happy to learn about these various different programs. And I think Assam has already been recruited to our PPP with regards to ultra rare tumors, and I also want to thank Joan Todd and Barbara and CDRH Studios for taking the editing work out of these productions and moving it to CDRH Studios. I'm just completely grateful, and I hope you guys have a rest of your day, and I hope you continue to charge forward in making treatments for these rare disease populations. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
You too.
Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff.
Everyone.